Human Rights Watch is raising the alarm over deaths near the Tanzanian North Mara gold mine. In a statement, the organization says 6 people have reportedly been killed during clashes with police guarding that mine and its surrounds. Let's talk to Oriem Nyeko, who's a senior researcher in the Africa division at Human Rights Watch. Oriem, good morning to you and welcome to the program. A very concerning story, this one, and I'd love for you to provide our viewers with a little more context before we get into the details about potential police complicity and the responses of the mine the mine owners who co-own this mine with the government there. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Sure, I can explain. The North Mara gold mine is a mine in Tarime district, which is in the north west of Tanzania. It's an area where people in the community have been conducting artisanal mining for centuries. People have been using it to gain income. And this mine started a commercial operation in around 2002 and has been historically owned by a private company up until 2019 when a Canadian company called Barrick Gold and the Tanzanian government came to own the mine. But the real problem that we are talking about now is about how the police, who have been basically employed to guard the mine, have been shooting to kill people they accuse of invading the mine or stealing from it. And these are typically people who live in the area. And the issue also is that literally nobody has been held to account. There's been no arrests that have been made, no prosecutions. And so we are calling for the Tanzanian government to take serious action to ensure that these deaths and also the injuries that have been surrounded by this violence are investigated, because there's no reason why nobody should be being held to account for such terrible human rights abuses.
Just to clarify, Oriem, these murders or these killings, when did they happen? And I'm just trying to establish the distance between the incident and these calls for government to intervene and whether or not they have.
So the violence has been happening for years. Actually, the government entered into an agreement with the company at the time that owned the mine in 2014 to bring in police that they were going to pay to, as I said, to guard the mine. And since then, different groups and community members have been complaining about, reporting this violence, about people being killed. But it seems to have really escalated in the last year or so. And we at Human Rights Watch documented at least 6 cases since February, of people who have been killed in this violence. And I mean, 6 is 6 too many, as you can imagine. And people in the community are really concerned that it's going to get even worse.
Yeah. So police, it would seem, by the accounts that you've shared in the research that you've done in the work that you're doing, have been converted into some kind of private force. Would that be an accurate characterization?
Yeah, it seems that the police are basically acting as private security for this mine, which is deeply problematic because, one, when these abuses are committed, the question about who is going to hold them to account, ideally, it should be the police, right? If a private security firm was going around killing people, then the police would have to come in and investigate and hold to account those individuals in the private security firm. But now the police themselves are acting in that way, which is why it's so critically important that the Tanzanian government, if indeed they are committed to promoting and preserving human rights, that they ensure that this violence is independently investigated. The problem, as I mentioned earlier, is that the police, when they speak about it, they accuse the people who have died or having themselves been committing violence. But we don't know what the truth is because there's been no steps being taken to do any kind of independent investigation.
Well, since we're talking about this, as you say, no independent investigation, and there's a history of silence and non-responsiveness by government officials who should be responsible, no investigations, independent investigations, or even arrests of people, just what would appear then the summary murders of people who might be standing in the way. We will try and get an independent response then from government officials who are responsible for this particular area. But it is a concerning situation. Let's talk about the mining company owners. As you pointed out, they own this particular mine in joint ownership with the government. I'm not sure what the shareholding gearing is. But Barrick Gold Mine is standing back, saying that they have no central control, or they have no control over the mine. What responsibility would they bear ordinarily in a situation like this?
Well, companies also have responsibilities. It's not just the government. In this case, as we mentioned, the security company, not the security company, the police are essentially acting as a security company to protect this mine that the company has a vested interest in. And their responsibility is to ensure that any association that they have with the authorities, with the police, does not violate human rights of anybody that is associated that is affiliated with their business. And they themselves have committed to doing that in their human rights policy. And it's also a principle of international law that companies should also take responsibility for these kinds of actions. The problem is that many of the actors, the government, the companies, are deferring their responsibility. The company told us, we wrote to them and engaged with them. They told us that they have no control over the police. They have no responsibility for what they are doing. The police are simply enforcing the law. But if you are going to bring a business to a country where people's human rights are impacted, then you have to take a concrete stand against those rights abuses.
And am I right in understanding that there is already a lawsuit in Canada that involves Barrick that's been brought by a number of Tanzanians who are claiming that it's complicit in these human rights violations?
Yes, you're correct. There's 21 Tanzanians who are suing Barrick Gold in Canada. The case is currently at a preliminary stage. They are still determining whether the Canadian court will be able to hear the case. There's jurisdictional questions there. But the case in and of itself, it deals with abuses that happened several years ago, which I think speaks to how problematic this issue is, and that there are people who are making complaints about killings and beatings from more than 2 years ago, and it's still happening. It's still getting worse. As I mentioned, we've documented cases just as recent as last month. And so it's likely that it's going to get even worse. And it's coming to a really critical stage where somebody has to do something, and somebody is the responsible parties, the government especially, whose agents are implicated in these abuses.
And as you say, the mining company themselves also needs to answer, because there are certain standards for how they operate in locations abroad, and whether they uphold, as you say, labor rights and operate in conformity with a particular country's laws. You're asking for this independent investigation to be launched, but it seems and I think you started out in the beginning sharing with us the contextual picture of the plight of communities, but also specifically mine workers in Tanzania, going back quite a ways, it would seem. Just talk to us a bit more beyond this particular mine, the North Mara gold mine. What is the condition and experience of mine workers in particular in the country?
Well, as I've spoken to people from that area, they've talked a lot about how dependent they are on income from mining. And these are people who, as I said, have been doing this in their families for centuries. Somebody talked to me about how their great-grandfather was doing this in the 1800s. It's very much interpolated with their lives. And the mine seems to have created and continue to create a sort of conflict and friction between in the community, because it's literally taking up a huge amount of space. It's taking up land. It's taking away the resources, the gold that people relied on for many years. And so I have the impression that that's one of the contributing factors to the conflict between the security forces and the mine and the community. So it's not happening in isolation. It's not that the police are randomly killing people. It's because there's an underlying issue of poverty that is being created by this business in this part of the country. And I think that while we're calling right now for an independent investigation into the killings and the abuses, the other abuses, there has to be a holistic kind of approach to addressing this, where people's land rights are addressed, people's rights to earn income are also addressed. I think that there's a bigger picture that needs to be tackled.
And it is a disturbing picture that you're sharing with us. Oriem Anyeko, senior researcher at Africa Human Rights Watch. And we mentioned two entities, of course, the government and Barrick Gold Mine will also pursue a response from them. As you heard the calls there from Human Rights Watch for an independent and impartial investigation into what would seem to be, and some of the human rights abuses that they have highlighted and concerns around the role of police in those communities as well. So